Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the web seminar, Achieving Continuous Mobile Testing, sponsored by Kobiton. We are going to give people just a couple of minutes to join, so we'll be getting started in about 2 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's web seminar, Achieving Continuous Mobile Testing, sponsored by Kobiton and featuring speakers Frank Moyer, Kobiton's CTO, and Nilesh Patel, Director of Testing Services at KMS Technology. I'm your host from TechWell, Beth Romanek. Thanks for joining us today. Before I hand it over to our speakers for the presentation, let me explain this console you see in front of you. All three panels on your screen can be moved around and resized. At the bottom of your console, you'll also see a widget toolbar. By clicking the Handouts widget in the middle, the one that looks like a piece of paper, you can download a PDF of the speaker's slides today. If you have any technical issues, please let us know by typing in the Questions and Answers panel on the left. This is, of course, also how you can submit questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. And finally, for your best viewing experience, please close any unnecessary applications you have running in the background. We are recording this web seminar, and we will make it available to watch on demand after the event. Once the recording is ready, you'll get an email with instructions about how you can watch the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our speakers, Frank Moyer and Nilesh Patel.
Thank you very much, Beth, and thank you, TechWell, for hosting this event. I am Frank Moyer. I'd like to say hello, and I'm with Nilesh.
How you guys doing?
So just briefly to go into the agenda for today, we're going to talk a lot about continuous testing, and then specifically we're going to hone in on what it means for mobile. I want to first start out and just get a level set on what continuous testing is. We're not going to try to cover all of what continuous testing is. We're really going to focus on the meat of what continuous testing means and what it means to mobile. So moving on to the semantics, people get probably the biggest confusion over the past few years is what exactly is continuous testing, and how can I apply it within my organization. The most popular diagram around continuous testing was a diagram that was created by Dan Ashby back in 2016. And Nilesh, this talks a lot about the overall development flow and then where we do testing throughout.
Right, and the main point here is testing is done everywhere throughout the whole entire life cycle. So that's the key part of continuous testing is you're testing continuously across the whole entire software development life cycle.
Great. I was at a incubator program for about 6 months, and we were just doing customer discovery interviews, and we were testing and trying to break the ideas we had. And so in a certain way, that's continuous testing at the very early part.
Exactly, completely agree with you right there.
And then all the way into production when you're monitoring, making sure that your monitoring works and you have ways to feed back, because there's that feedback loop from monitor to plan to make sure you're capturing the information to make the overall system better.
Right, and that's the key part of the whole DevOps lifecycle, is to get faster feedback back to your clients, back to your developers to know how to improve going forward.
Great. And then, the other part that Dan focuses on is minimizing the business risk. That's our goal. That's the overall tester's goal, is to minimize business risk, and applying continuous testing helps with that. So, what continuous testing is not, it's explicitly, they say it's not just the testing component of continuous integration, right? It's broader than that. It involves all parts, as we just walked through.
Right.
It's not just automation testing. It's broader and includes manual testing, whatever parts of unit testing, every part of the testing and the development lifecycle. And it doesn't focus on a specific platform. It looks at all platforms. However, having said that, we've just talked about what the broad definition of continuous testing is. But to make this practical, we are going to focus in on the testing component. We're going to focus a lot in on automation testing, and we're going to talk a lot about mobile instead of talking more at an abstract.
Yeah.
We're going to be very specific.
Like the key thing I want to add here is that the automation testing it's part of continuous testing. It's one of probably the most important part of continuous testing. I don't think you can say you're practicing continuous testing without the automation piece. So just wanted to add that in there, Frank.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to move on to why it's important, and I'm going to let Nilesh is going to talk a little bit here about the importance of continuous testing.
Yeah, this is from this DevOps State of DevOps report that we recently found from the different delivery performance of the different types of organizations performing at an elite level, high level, a medium level, and low level. And if you look at it, you see the change of failure rates are very low when you're deploying more frequently, right? So if you see like the elite, you're seeing a 0 to 15% failure rate when you're deploying at least once a day, and so forth. But the key here is the way to get faster feedback is to release quicker, right? And that is the key thing of continuous testing, because you get the feedback loop is much greater, so you're able to get your feedback out a lot quicker. And due to all the different global competition out there right now, it's key to get your software out quicker, so that way you can please your customer base and so forth. So that's kind of the reason why you see this here is that the failure rates, you're operating at a higher level when you're deploying frequently, you're continuous testing frequently, and that's how they're rating you as a higher elite organization.
And part of this, I would expect also, is the amount of risk that gets introduced with every change.
Yeah, exactly, right. So the more changes are, the more risk you have, but you want to make sure you minimize that risk, and that's where the testing comes in to minimize those risks.
And back to, one of the things Nilesh mentioned was the frequency of updates. In this day and age, when you're delivering mobile applications, your customers there's a 60% greater likelihood somebody will download your mobile app if it's been updated in the past 2 weeks. So, an app that goes on for months without being updated has a lower likelihood.
Right, and that's where you get back to the global competition. You got to release fast in order to get your product out quicker and get a bigger approval rating in the store or better feedback in the customer reviews and so forth.
Great. Now, there was a survey done a couple of years ago about, the question was, what are the main holdups in the software production process? And the perception is, 63% of the holdup is related to test or QA. And whether that perception is reality, it is the perception. And we'll talk some more about, back to the previous point of being able to deliver multiple times a day, being able to deploy multiple times a day, and how testing oftentimes is considered the holdup or the bottleneck, at least perceived holdup and bottleneck.
We see that a lot in our clients and our customer base, is that when we go into these automation engagements or testing engagements, they come back the main pain point saying QAs are bottleneck. We can't release fast enough because testing doesn't have enough time. They haven't tested everything thoroughly, so we can't release as fast as we like to.
And what do they, when they say that, do they have in mind something specific that they were trying to get to?
I mean, they want to go to a continuous deployment, continuous delivery, but they're not ready there yet. They don't have the skill set there. They don't have the tools set up in order to actually practice that whole fasting out, delivering faster, releasing faster. They need to have the whole infrastructure, the framework in place in order to do that. They just don't have that yet.
Okay, great. Thank you. Also, as part of that Accelerate survey, it was apparent in reading through this that there's a focus not just in understanding that there is a relationship between CI and automation testing, but there is a high correlation between successful CI and automation testing. I think what Nilesh said earlier, which is it's an imperative to have automation in place in order to achieve CI.
Right, and well, long as it's piped in, right? That's the key. If people have automation in place, it might not be automated, triggered. It might be sitting until the end, and someone physically pushes the button to execute the test. That's not what we need. We need it plugged into your CI/CD pipeline in order to actually get the true benefits from it.
Great. In addition to the item we just went through, which was accelerating continuous integration, continuous testing also addresses risk and brand damage. I think it's been all over the tech news today that Twitter released an Android version that crashed as soon as the user tried to launch Twitter. So they've been having to do a lot of damage control around their brand. They worked through the night last night trying to fix it. They fixed a release this morning. And that, that's had an impact on their brand. The big business, large scale software failures like that don't happen often, but when they do happen, on average, they have an impact of 4.06% on the stock price. I checked Twitter stock price today, and it's definitely down 2% below the overall stock market. In addition, in this day and age, it's not just the large scale software failures. It's also because of social media and the ability to rapidly disseminate information. When there is a brand failure, a minor incident could also have a huge impact on the brand. The App Store reviews are public. People comb those App Store reviews, and we were working with a client the other day that had a 4.9 star rating on the App Store, but one of their apps crashed. One of the devices crashed their app, and a few users started putting 2 1-star reviews, and that had not just a negative impact on the star rating, but also people were looking for those negative reviews and seeing those crashes.
And that's a valid point. I know when I go look at reviews, I was looking at the negative ratings first to see, hey, are they issuing problems that I'm going to face that I'm going to be annoyed with or not like? And that way, that makes me more likely to download the app or not download the app. It's based on the reviews. The other thing I wanted to add to that Twitter thing is that test is an easy test to automate. They would have known if they had it piped into a pipeline. I don't know if they did or did not, but if they did, it's a simple launch of the application. If it fails, the test would have failed, and they would have been able to roll back to make sure that never got into production. So that's how the pipeline and all that stuff comes into play, and automation comes into play. Could have helped prevent this if they had it plugged into their pipeline and so forth, and were able to do the checks they needed to do.
Great. And there's the final point here is that there is a broad impact on continuous testing across the organization, that decisions need to be made as part of continuous testing around what the highest items to test are to reduce the business risk. So, just in summary, continuous testing, although it's not just the component of continuous integration, just automation testing, and just a specific platform, we are continually, as testers, trying to reduce the time and reduce the business risk associated with change.
Yep, 100% agree with you there. I mean, there's no doubt about it there. The point of a tester is to reduce that risk, right? We can't assure quality, right? We're not going to make sure everything's working perfect 100%, but we can reduce the risk that something might break and go out in production with some bugs in there and so forth.
Great.
Yep.
The next item I'd like to go through is, and this really tees us up as we start to hone in more on mobile, are the impediments to continuous testing. What causes, at least at the perception level, that the test part is the whole?
Yep.
And right now, how do we as testers achieve that same level attribute of continuous that's been granted to build, release, and deploy?
Yep.
How do we achieve that? And just related is it's where the market wants to go. A comparison done last year between where the current state of frequency of deployment against the desired frequency of deployment, there's a big gap. There are a lot more people who want to get to hourly and daily deployments than actually do today. And going back to the earlier slide, a lot of that's, again, attributed to the time that it takes to get a level of quality assurance to do this.
Right, I agree. And again, it all goes down to that whole global competition. Right? There's competition in all everyone's industry, and again, to get that software out faster, get the feedback from the customers quicker is going to make you a step above your competitors.
Before we move on, Nilesh, from your experience, have you seen resistance from test organizations who are accustomed to spending 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we do see that quite often. Is because, and it's a lot of it's due to the skill set of the teams. Like we said before, the skill sets are not there in terms of automation and so forth. They can't script as fast enough if they want to. They don't have the tools in place. They can't test all the devices or all the different browsers because they don't have anything set up for them to do that. As well as they don't have pipelines set up. So again, it came back to what I was talking about before. They don't have the infrastructure and framework to achieve continuous testing. So that's been the biggest. They might have the skills and the people to do it, but they don't have the tooling around it to actually support that. So that's what I would say. We see that a lot in a lot of our engagements.
Great. So that sort of segues well into some of what you were just talking about.
Exactly right. So there's a lot of things here in the external to testing, right? There's these are stuff that you see from what you can control within the testing team and what's outside the testing. And a lot of the testers will hear some of this, will understand this, like late delivery of the application, right? That happens all the time, right? That's a pain point. Unexpected changes to the application. Testers see that all the time when we're doing it. I didn't expect that to happen. This wasn't supposed to be there. This wasn't part of the user story and so forth. So you see all of that. These are all these things that kind of hinder their ability to achieve continuous testing, right? There's environment instability, right? Environments are always never set up, right? If you don't have labs set up properly or if they're in-house, you're going to see a lot of failures in environment, just in terms of having browsers set up, mobile devices being available to test. You might not have all that set up. Not to mention just a bunch of defects. You see a lot of defects already in the application that's going to hold you up from going to deliver. For instance, for Twitter, if it's failing at launch, you really can't test anything besides that. It's already there. You got to get past that first, right? And then there's a different variable in test environments. Again, there's a bunch of different browsers, not much with mobile. Mobile has a bigger different variations, but browsers still have a good amount of variations as well. There's different releases you got to go out, different versions, different internet browsers and all that stuff. So you got to make sure you test all that. And obviously in internal testing, you see it's a lack of resources, right? That's probably the biggest thing is most testing teams are not as big as the development teams. They're usually smaller, so they don't have the resources to do that stuff. Lack of skills to automate, right? A lot of people don't have the coding skills to automate, so that's why there's new tools that do little codeless scripting, so that helps a little bit. So that's stuff like that. So you got to figure out what your skill set is of your teams. Lack of tooling, I mentioned before. There's not enough tools that support what they need to support. And then just again, like the lack of testing environments. That's something that's testers have faced on our clients engagement all the time. That's like, well, we only have one iOS device and we only have one Android. So we got to test everything and get enough coverage just based on those two devices, which is kind of scary because there's millions and millions of devices out there that probably need to be tested as well too. That's like Frank said before, there's one user and one Android user that had a bad rating that dropped your rating down. So that could cause a big issue, at least the production into the customer. So
great.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to go through a few with Nilesh adding some color here about the different approaches that we've seen at Kobiton for achieving continuous testing. And I'll go through three. I think I mentioned the last slide, 4. It's 3. We are working with one of our customers is over a $10 billion market cap company. So they have a lot of capital. Mobile is a critical part of their business. They have 3,000 devices.
Wow, that's a lot of devices.
3,000 devices in-house, and 60 testers around the clock executing manual tests. So I know, Nilesh, you said, you have that automation was an imperative to continuous testing.
Correct.
I sort of think this is an exception here, right?
Yeah, it's sort of an exception, sure. I mean, you can't get away without doing some manual testing. Automation testing can test only so much, right? A lot of it, we'll talk about more of the stable tests, more of that stuff. It's more of the easy, lightweight tests, or probably more higher candidates for automation. But you still have to test a lot of manual stuff because you don't know. It's kind of like the business critical workflows, right? The workflows are going to be tested more by users instead of by machines. Machines and automation can only test exactly what you tell it to do. But there are things, obviously, we know when we go around here, you click here, you go here, you go here, you can find some more issues. We can find more critical issues than as opposed to what you find by just checking, right? It's testing versus checking, the whole James Bach theory. But so I guess, yeah, this approach would be a need for manual testers for sure. I see that here.
Yeah, and they have no automation. It's all manual.
Yeah.
And just around the clock, constantly as they do new releases, they're hitting those 3,000 devices using Kobiton. With 60 testers.
And they have a lot of testers for
it. Yeah, it's around the clock.
So,
it's 3 shifts, 7 days a week, 60 testers. I think between 60 and 100.
Right.
So they do a whole lot of tests to make sure that their app is not crashing like Twitter.
Makes sense. Makes complete
It's not Twitter. I guarantee, I promise it's not Twitter. Although Twitter, if you're listening, we'd have it obvious. So going on to the next one. So one of our other customers in the insurance industry takes a different tack. They actually combine the development process and their automation process together. So the automation engineer sits alongside the developers in the team, the Scrum team, and they build the automation at the same time the developers are building the app. When they deploy, actually it's a web app. So when they deploy, the developers and the automation engineers check everything in together to Git, and then it builds automatically and deploys automatically.
Yeah, so I think this is a good example of a really working well continuous testing model, just because it's integrated teams, right? That's part of, you saw that diagram that was back earlier in the slide, you say testing was involved in every single aspect, from deployment, from monitoring to deploy to everything, the whole entire circle. Testing was involved there, so you have to be integrated into the whole entire life cycle and integrate with the team to truly achieve that. So I think this is a very good example of how continuous testing could work in a model. So.
And what are the challenges with this approach? Why wouldn't every organization? I mean, in the next slide we go through some of it, like this physically dispersed.
A lot of it has to do with, some of the challenges you might say, they might be, it's easier when everyone's located in the same office. I mean, it could be, there's definitely a challenge when testers and developers are not in the same time zone space, which happens a lot. So that's a challenge right there. But to overcome those challenges, you need tools, right? Some kind of collaboration tools could help with that, like Slack, so forth, and such situations like that could help with that. But those are the main challenges I see, is people not being co-located.
Okay.
That makes it very hard to achieve this, but you have to have tools to balance that out and to kind of mitigate that risk.
Yeah, makes sense. Probably the most popular approach to automation is what from our customers at least, is the wait to automate approach, which is, in this customer, they were physically separated. The developers are in the US, the automation engineers are in India, and when a new release is pushed to test, the first thing the automation engineers do are they run all their tests, they see what breaks, and they triage every single test script that failed and said, okay, why did it fail? Did it fail because of a bug, or did it fail because the script needs to be updated? And there are a lot of, usually this takes about, for this customer, takes at best a week, and at worst
longer than that.
Yeah, sure. Like a month.
Yeah, I mean, this is more of what in the state of the DevOps would classify this as a low-performing organization, because now you're really waiting till them to finish everything before you can release, and that could be detrimental in my opinion, to getting your releases out there and getting that faster feedback. Make sure you're ahead of the competition, because now you have to wait till everything gets done in order to actually go ahead and push forward. Now, it depends on the industry as well too. Some industries are okay with not having releases out every week, but if you're in the e-commerce industry or something like that, or the mobile industries, you got to get out quick, fast. And this would probably deter you. But again, it all depends on the industry. Or the retail industry, it seems like here it might be okay. It might be
right.
It might be an approach that they could go with.
Okay. Before I go on to the next slide, there's another approach which is I didn't include because it didn't have a testing step, but GitHub does this. They will automatically, their developers can deploy, and it goes directly to production, right? So they do their testing, and every time they do a push, it gets automatically built, runs through some tests and minimal tests, but they monitor the production deployment. They do a canary deployment.
Sure.
That canary deployment they have real-time monitoring to detect whether the canary deployment
is working well.
Has any anomalies against the previous release, and if it does, they back out the release.
Yeah, that's a good approach too. I mean, I know a lot of companies that do canary releases, and that helps that because you can see if, hey, like you said before, is there a problem in this release or not? Then I can flip the switch to go everyone over to the main release. So,
for those who are not familiar with a canary release, the term comes from the canary in the coal mine, where you put a canary in the coal mine to see if it died before you sent down your workers, and that's what with Kubernetes, which is a common deployment stack right now, has out of the box canary deployments, so you can just say I want 5% of my workload to go towards the canary release.
Yep.
Very easily.
It's like the whole alpha A/B type testing that you do there. So that's testing. We do canary. We do A/B testing. So.
So when I look at those four that we discussed, the testers are doing everything they can, given the resources, to reduce that duration, to make that duration shorter in order to get product out faster. But ultimately, there's a level of prioritization that needs to be done, some constraints that need to be put in place because there are limited resources.
Yes, exactly. And in terms of, that's why you have to pick the right test to automate, the right suites to automate. You cannot, obviously when you get out fast, you want tests that are going to run really quickly, they're not going to fail quickly. So high prioritized tests that run fast or that are very stable. You don't want to run tests that are brittle, because that's going to give you false positives. And that's going to, and if you can't release because of a false test, because of a failed test, then there goes your release. You're not releasing out. So you have to pick and choose the right test suites that you want to run as part of your releases. So you got to prioritize based on a bunch of different factors, but you want to prioritize those test suites for each of your different releases.
Great. So Nilesh, can you talk a little bit about the tools?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a bunch of tools that we've used. A lot of these are automation tools and some tools that for platforms and so forth and device management, but there's a bunch of tools that you can use to kind of help you along the way, the continuous testing, across your continuous testing journey, I would say. Tools, again, are needed. You cannot do this without tools. It won't work. So one of the tools that helps this is Mabel. It's a browser testing only tool. It's kind of like, it uses AI. It's geared for people that don't have very good programming skills or automation testing, the coding skills, because it allows you to do just record and playback kind of in a little bit of a more intuitive way, and then allows the AI engine behind it to actually go ahead and make sure those tests are right. So it's UI tests only, really. If that's a big component of your application, Mabel might be a good option for you guys, because there's a lot of UI tests, and it involves very little or no coding at all. So it kind of solves the skill level resource challenge you guys might have, your organization might have.
So the tester in that scenario, they go in, I guess it looks like they have a browser plugin.
Exactly, it's a browser plugin. I believe it's a Chrome plugin, I believe. It's a browser plugin, and then you just go around your testing like you would normally test your application. You go around and just do your workflows, and then it will automatically kick in, and it plugs into your CI/CD Jenkins. I think it does some other integration tools, and it allows you to pipe those tests in. So whenever a build kicks off, you can kick off those tests to see if it's a good build or a bad build, and then go from there.
Neat, very neat.
Functionize is kind of a new tool. I was just introduced this recently, but it's a browser testing only tool, but it does something pretty cool. It's basically no code, because you're using speech to test the product. So I can just talk to it and say, hey, log into this application, and it'll log into it. So that's a new tool out there. It's kind of using more Gherkin-like. Obviously, Gherkin's the BDB, where it's kind of user stories are written out in plain English. That way, it's again, it solves the problem of testers on your team that don't have the coding skills. So it's kind of that's the biggest harm we see in my clients is, oh, my testers don't have the coding skills to achieve automation. Well, now that's not a problem anymore. So that's what these kind of tools are helping you, is to kind of get over that barrier and that challenge you guys might be facing.
Sounds like Functionize is not just the testers who don't have the coding skills, but also the typing skills.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it a lot quicker, right? Again, it helps with the speeding up. So it's a pretty cool tool. It's fairly new. It's fairly new, but it's interesting. So
I'd like to see how it works with you and how fast you speak.
Yeah, that'll be a good test. If it can recognize what I'm doing as fast as I'm speaking, then it'll pass. It'll be pretty successful, I think.
Excellent.
And the other one is Catalan, right? Catalan is a web and mobile-based automation tool. It takes into account with both the technical and non-technical testers of it. So you have this one set tool it's a kind of a framework, really. It's more than a tool. It's a complete end-to-end automation solution where you can run your tests from creation all the way on to the device management as well too, because there's a bunch of different plugins with Kobiton as well and some other applications, Sauce Labs as well. It also does record and playback, so it allows people that are not as technical to record tests. But it's a pretty powerful tool built on Appium and Selenium.
We've covered what continuous testing is, the different impediments to continuous testing, and then talk about how how mobile is different than web. So one of the biggest differences is all the disparate devices that you have to work with. I know in the web world you have to deal with a few browsers.
Yeah, not as many devices as true.
But this is a graph using data from Mover, who looks at the usage of device types across the industry globally. The number of devices that you would need to test on to get different levels of coverage. So, for example, to get to a 75% coverage on just one operating system, you're talking over 25 devices to get there. If you want to get north of 90%, you're looking at over 300 devices to test on.
And I will tell, of all engagements that we have, most people don't have even 5 devices, to be honest. Devices are pretty expensive. They cost a lot of money, so most of the companies don't invest in that. They invest more in like the simulators and so forth. But obviously, simulators are not a good way to test. But you would barely see a lot of organizations don't have upwards of 20, 30, 40 devices. They're very, very small on the smaller side of things, just because of the cost.
And on the Kobiton side, we see this often, where our customers will come to us with a critical issue that one of their users is experiencing. They will ask us to, if we don't have a device already, to go procure a device that they need for testing. Sure. And we turn that around very rapidly in order for them to reproduce the problem on Kobiton. So that there is no need to buy the 300 devices.
Sure, exactly. It solves budget problems for sure.
It's like using the device in hand. And if you still have devices in hand in your organization, you can still use those as well. So, if you have 30 devices right now that you are at the 75%, but you want to get to the 90%, you can plug those 30 into your own environment and connect to Kobiton and supplement those with the other devices provided by Kobiton. In addition to device types, which has so much disparity, you also have operating systems. So not every operating system behaves the same way. So on Android, you can't guarantee that a Samsung S8 will behave the same way on 2 different versions of Android.
Yeah, it makes sense. But one question came to mind is, what about the different types of networks that you use? Because obviously there's different types of stuff going on in different different countries, different US. So that's something that I'm sure that has to be tested as well too.
Right.
The network bandwidth and all that other stuff that goes along with mobile, because you're not always on the same carrier, you're on different carriers, and that could introduce a whole slew of different types of problems.
Right. We connect a lot of our devices to SIM. We have SIMs in them, and so they're actually connected to carrier networks, different carrier networks, to allow because they perform, like you say, they perform differently,
right?
Not just speed, but also how they actually transmit packets.
Yeah. And I would say internationalization should be an issue too, or localization, however you want to call it. That would be another complexity to mobile testing as well too, just because you can change the different fonts to keyboards to different languages and so forth. So that has to be kind of supported as well too, right? So I think that would be another variation to the complexity of this mobile testing.
Yeah, one of our clients, their application only works in Australia. So it's a video streaming application, and the only way is to actually appear through Australia. So we use a proxy service, Luminati, that makes it appear like the device is in Australia, so they can actually test, even though the device is physically located.
The cool thing, I think one thing you mentioned over there is the record and playback. So I kind of want to know a little bit more about that. What's the challenge you guys face with record and playback with mobile? I know there's challenges with on the web side of things, but it'd be cool to hear what your aspect is on it from the mobile side.
And on the other, like, crashes don't really happen in the web world.
Not as much,
It's a different animal, and in mobile, it's a common complaint of users of this app is continually crashing, like Twitter. And then the cross device type testing. So the world of record and playback on web, it's been around for 15 plus years.
Probably even more than that. Yeah, it's been around for a while.
The biggest challenge on mobile is that there is no standard to render the XML or the HTML. So in a browser, there is a W3C standard, a specification that says, here is how the HTML should be rendered.
Right.
And Chrome and Safari and Firefox, they're all using that specification. Microsoft's gotten in trouble over the years because they haven't followed to exact, but now they're back in line and everyone's trying to adhere to this spec. In the mobile world, there is that spec doesn't exist. It's a free-for-all, and the manufacturers get to render the XML however they deem appropriate. And they're using that as a way to get a competitive advantage over their competition. We're going to render it to give a smoother animation.
Sure.
And so they control the rendering, they control the XML. That makes it increasingly difficult to do record and playback, because if you record in browser, you say, here's the element, here is the selector to get to that element. In the mobile world, that is different between a Samsung, an LG, a Samsung S8, and S10. So there's just a lot of variability, and it makes that it's very difficult to do.
Yeah, I can see the pain in the automation trying to automate that, because in true sense, they'd have to automate on all the different devices, or at least the different OSs that are out there to make it work, right? So they'd have to to do a script on Android, then script on iOS, and so forth.
Yeah. So the typical workflow, like with Perfecto, is you go and you record a script on one device. You then, as a tester, go into the other device types and get the selectors that you plug into your script. So you're actually if you're scripting across 50 devices, you're going into 50 different devices.
Wow. That could be, and that could slow down
100 tests.
That could slow down your release, slow down your automation, and getting things out as fast as we wanted to. So I can see that could definitely be a pain point.
So we launched on January 6th the ability to do that, the ability to record on one device and play it across any other device type. We use a combination of machine learning and statistical techniques to identify the element across device types. That allows the tester right before a release to run a manual test on one and then replay that across hundreds of devices if they deem.
I think that's a pretty cool thing and a pretty game changer if you ask me, just because it gets to the whole point of now we're delivering faster, we're able to do more. I'm not waiting on the automation guys to sit there and script for the 50 different devices. I'm doing it one time and it's ready to run on all of them, which is a pretty cool thing, if you ask me.
Yeah, we set out to empower the manual tester to give them the same capabilities that an automation engineer would have.
Not even that, it just saves the tester time now. They
Right.
work on other things now. They can test more important things instead of worrying about, man, it's going to take me 4 days just to run this one script for everything I need to do, and I can now do it in a matter of minutes or hours. Right? So
That's right.
Yep. I think it's pretty cool. Like, just to save I used to be a tester in the past life. For me, saving time was the best thing for me. That's why I liked automation, was due to that I didn't have to do things manually, right? I wanted to save some of my time, use my time on more important things that I needed to work on. So this would definitely, I see a lot of testers would definitely be willing to jump on this if they have this available to them.
Yeah, and our existing customers have enjoyed it up to this point. We are opening it up to all of our trial customers on February 17th. And then the first of our, what we're calling assertion libraries, our first one is our crash detection library. So we will, you can run a manual test on an iPhone 8, rerun those same tests, the same commands across 100 different devices, Android and iOS, and you will get a report of any crashes that occurred during that test.
That's pretty cool, for sure.
We will be expanding that throughout the year to include many more assertions. We have about 6 different assertion libraries that will look at different aspects of the application. So you will, by the end of it, get a holistic view of an application in terms of visual, performance, how it uses CPU memory, and obviously crashes. So we've got those lined up quarter over quarter over the next few quarters. And we look forward by the end of the year where a tester can execute a manual test on one device, rerun that across any other device type, will automatically detect any performance issues, UI issues, crashes. And then when you get a new application release, instead of having to rerun all of those manual tests again, we have auto healing in place that will allow those to be automatically updated.
That's pretty cool. That's all going to be as part of, like, out of the box solution for Kobiton, or I need to configure that or do something separate with it?
It's just like you do today with running a manual test, but you'll be given the ability at the end of the manual test to expand that to hundreds of devices.
Makes sense. It's pretty cool. Sounds interesting.
So thank you very much for the audience here. Thank you for your time, and I think I'm going to hand it back to Beth.
Okay, thanks very much. So as you can see, the Q&A is now in session. We've already got some great questions here, but everyone feel free to continue asking the speakers your questions by typing in that questions and answers panel on the left and then clicking submit. Okay, so first question for all of you. This person wants to know, will I be able to invoke the automation script generated by the intelligence test automation product?
Yes. So there is an API that will allow you to launch any of your tests through the API. So you can integrate it into your CI/CD. So the workflow is you run a manual test, you decide on the devices you want to run it against, and then from the API itself, you will be able to call that automation ID from the API in your CI/CD pipeline and specify the devices you want to run it against.
Okay, awesome. Let's see here. So I'm an existing Kobiton customer. Is ITA currently included in my plan?
So we are right now, the navigation part of ITA, which is the ability to replay across a multitude of devices. will be included in your plan. It's you will still have to pay for the device minutes used by the execution across those devices.
Awesome. We have 30 in-house devices today that we perform manual testing on. Can I run ITA against these devices?
You can. So you can use a combination of in-house devices as well as our cloud devices. And it's just a matter of pointing to those devices that you have in-house. What we do is we will look at the device type, and we will provide preference to anything that you have in-house or private, and then fall back to a public cloud device if it's not in your private list.
And how many devices does a Kobiton license cover, and how many devices can we test on simultaneously?
So the license structure is based on a number of slots or concurrent testers. So you can, if you want to run your tests faster, you can increase the number of concurrent or simultaneous tests, and that is how it's structured. If you can have 50 devices, and if you want to run 5 concurrent tests, you can do that.
So I've used Perfecto's record and playback at my last job, and I still had to go into every device that I wanted to test on, determine the XPath selectors, and then add that to the generated script. Quite a process. So will I need to do that with ITA as well?
Yeah, so I covered this. I covered this earlier. No, you won't. So when we go, our machine learning will actually identify the selector across device types. We'll also provide you the ability to export the selectors so that you can run those in your raw Appium scripts. Instead of having to go, like you do today in Perfecto, into every single device type, you can export that and run, you focus on the part of automate. If you're an automation engineer, don't focus on going into every device and every element and finding out the selector. That's no fun. No. You want to code the logic. You want to you want to break the system, not break your fingers from figuring out all the XPath. Yeah. So we're making this really really easy, and hopefully we're making the automation engineers, the Appium automation engineers' life a lot more pleasant.
Awesome. Okay. Next question. I'm familiar with Mabel and its ability to compare UI across different versions. Will your ITA product be able to do that as well?
Yes. So in Q2 of this year, we'll start releasing our UI comparison libraries, our assertion libraries, that will compare. And one thing I'd like to point out on this question is, unlike web, where you're looking at the viewport is a browser and can be resized, with mobile apps, you're looking through a viewport that has a set of standard aspect ratios, dimensions, operating systems, and we're going to use the intelligence from the metadata contained in those devices to make it a much more pleasant experience than you do anywhere else.
Awesome. Okay. So between Mabel, Functionize, and Catalan, do you have any suggestions on which one I should use for browser testing?
Now, there's not one for all. It depends on what your company or you want to focus on. I think they all have great benefits, each one of them. Mabel is very good for browser UI testing. Again, but if you guys are looking for more API testing and so forth, then I would say Catalan. But if it's just browser only, between Mabel, I think all 3 of them have their benefits, but it depends on how you want to expand your automation out. Like if Mabel doesn't support a good API testing just yet, so if you want to do functional and API, then I would say Catalan. And then Functionize, it's still fairly new in my opinion, but they have a lot of skills there too. So it depends on how much in-depth coverage of testing you want to do, and then you can select the tool of choice you want. If you just focus on UI only, then I would say go with Mabel and don't worry about Catalan and Functionize. But if you're worried about API testing and mobile testing and all that other stuff, then I would say, hey, maybe you want to look at Catalan as opposed to that one. So you have to look at your needs first before you decide which tool to use. I mean, they all do things really well. It's just a matter of what else it can do that you need it for your testing needs.
Sure. How do you choose the tests to run for continuous testing from best practices?
So in my opinion there is you got to choose tests that are very stable, because these are tests that you're planning to run daily, if not a couple of times a day, maybe multiple times a day. So you have to choose tests that are very stable, that are going to run very quickly. They're not very UI intensive in my opinion. So for me, API tests are very good tests to choose for your continuous testing, because those are quick. If your API is broken, 9 out of 10 times your UI is going to be broken. So you want to pick tests that are robust and clean and very stable. So you have to and then you have to create your test suites that actually make sense, right? Test suites that, if it depends on the type of release you have. If it's a quick release, then you can maybe get away running 5, 10 tests. But if it's a complete platform modernization, you might need to run the whole end-to-end suite. So you need to figure out you got to select test suites that logically fit your release, basically, is how I would say to choose the right test suites to run.
Cool. Will I be able to invoke the automation scripts generated?
It looks like you may have read that one already.
Yeah,
That was in here?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think we did read them already. All right, sorry about that. I think that's it, actually. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that covers all the questions. Unless anyone else has any follow-up, feel free to email us at marketing@kobiton.com, and I'll be sure to share those questions with Frank and Nilesh and try to get you an answer turned around quickly. Other than that, thank you everyone for showing up today. We appreciate it. Thank you to the TechWell team for hosting us, and thank you, Frank and Nilesh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. And that will end our event for today. As Drew said, if you think of any other questions you'd like to ask the speakers, please email marketing@kobiton.com. So I would like to thank Frank and Nilesh for their time, and Kobiton for sponsoring this web seminar. And of course, all of you in the audience for spending this time with us today. So everybody have a great day, and we hope to see you at a future event.